Growing up, Claire and I were never close. We were half-sisters, sharing the same father but born from different mothers, and that distinction was never lost on anyone, especially Claire. She was younger by 4 years and carried herself with an air of entitlement that could make royalty seem humble. Our father, Richard, was a man of few words but firm actions, and it was clear early on that Claire was his favorite. He never outright said it, but his actions spoke volumes, from the way he beamed at her accomplishments, no matter how minor, to the way he'd brush aside anything I did with a nonchalant nod. It was obvious where his affections lay. Our grandfather, on the other hand, was a different story. Grandpa Joe, as we called him, was a retired professor, a gentle soul with a deep voice that could soothe even the most restless minds. He had a way of making me feel seen, truly seen, in ways my father never did. While Claire spent most of her time prancing around, soaking up every ounce of attention from Dad and his side of the family, I found solace in Grandpa's quiet wisdom. His house, an old but cozy cottage on the outskirts of town, became my sanctuary. The wooden shelves filled with books, the smell of fresh coffee mixed with the faint scent of pipe tobacco, it all felt like home in a way our own house never did. I spent countless afternoons sitting at his kitchen table, listening to his stories about his travels, his students, and his late wife, my grandmother. He had a twinkle in his eye whenever he talked about her, and I'd often catch him staring at their old wedding photo, lost in thought. "People like to measure wealth in money," he told me once, "but real wealth, Anna, is knowing who truly cares for you when you have nothing left." I never forgot those words. Claire, on the other hand, saw Grandpa as nothing more than an eccentric old man with a decent amount of savings. She rarely visited him, only showing up for obligatory holiday dinners and birthday celebrations, where she'd plaster on a smile and pretend to listen while scrolling through her phone. It always baffled me how someone could take him for granted, but that was Claire in a nutshell, always looking ahead to the next big thing, never appreciating what she already had. Despite our differences, I always thought that when the time came, we'd put aside our rivalry and support each other, especially after Grandpa passed away. But I should have known better. Claire had a knack for making everything about herself, and when Grandpa's will came into question, she wasted no time staking her claim. It started subtly at first, quiet conversations with our father, little remarks about how Grandpa had really confided in her before he passed, and then, finally, the bombshell. We were gathered in the living room, going through Grandpa's things, when Claire casually mentioned, "Oh, by the way, Dad and I discussed it, and since Grandpa trusted me more, I'll be handling his savings." I froze. The audacity, the sheer gall of it left me speechless for a moment. "Excuse me?" I managed, my voice sharper than I intended. Claire flipped her blonde hair over her shoulder, her lips curling into a smirk. "Grandpa told me he wanted me to take care of things. He knew I was more responsible." Her eyes flickered toward Dad, who simply nodded in agreement. I felt my pulse quicken. "Grandpa never said anything like that to me?" "Well," she shrugged, "maybe he just trusted me more." Her words hung in the air, thick with implication. Dad leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Claire's always been good with finances, Anna. It makes sense." It felt like a slap. I looked around, searching for some kind of support, but the room was silent. I swallowed hard, feeling the familiar sting of being the outsider, the afterthought. But then a memory surfaced. A week before Grandpa passed, he had pressed a sealed envelope into my hands. "Keep this safe, Anna," he had said, his eyes serious for once. "You'll know when to use it." At the time, I thought it was just one of his quirky habits, but now, with Claire's smug face staring back at me, I realized it might be something far more important. I took a deep breath and forced a smile. "We'll see," I said, standing up. "I think Grandpa might have left a few surprises we didn't know about." Claire's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, but she quickly recovered. Little did she know, I wasn't going to let this go without a fight. I spent the next few days with Grandpa's envelope tucked securely in my desk drawer, my mind racing through all the possibilities of what it could contain. Claire, in the meantime, wasted no time parading around as if she had already won. She flaunted her supposed inheritance, casually dropping hints about the smart investments she planned to make and how Grandpa understood her financial acumen better than anyone else. It was infuriating, but I kept my composure, biting my tongue and waiting for the right moment to strike. The family dynamic quickly shifted. Dad was fully on board with Claire's claim, telling anyone who would listen that Grandpa had always favored her business sense. "She's always been the responsible one," he told Aunt Margaret over Sunday dinner. "It just makes sense that she'd handle Grandpa's savings." I sat there, my fork frozen midair, watching as Claire basked in the attention, nodding along like she'd single-handedly run Wall Street. I felt like an outsider in my own family, just like always. The injustice of it gnawed at me, but I held on to the secret letter Grandpa had given me. Whatever was inside, I was certain it would be my trump card. That evening after dinner, I locked myself in my room and finally opened the envelope. My hands trembled slightly as I slid out a neatly folded sheet of paper. The first thing I saw was Grandpa's familiar handwriting, crisp and deliberate. "My dearest Anna, if you're reading this, it means things have unfolded as I suspected they would. You've always had a good heart, and I know you wouldn't seek conflict unless it was necessary. I trust you to do what is right. In case there's any confusion regarding my savings, let me be clear. Half of it belongs to you. I've made sure of that in the official documents. You may face resistance, but stay strong. Everything you need is enclosed." My breath caught in my throat as I reached further into the envelope and pulled out a photocopy of Grandpa's official will. My eyes scanned the words, and there it was, in black and white, and even split between Claire and me. I let out a shaky breath, feeling a surge of validation. But I knew Claire wouldn't take this news lightly. Armed with this revelation, I decided it was time to confront Dad. I found him in the living room the next day, sipping coffee and flipping through the newspaper. "Dad, can we talk?" I asked, my voice steady but firm. He barely glanced up. "What is it, Anna?" I placed the letter and will copy on the table in front of him. "Grandpa didn't leave everything to Claire. He wanted us to split it equally." Dad's eyes scanned the documents, and for a brief moment, I saw uncertainty flicker across his face. But then, with a heavy sigh, he shook his head. This doesn't change much, Anna. Claire's the one who's better suited to manage things. You wouldn't even know what to do with that money." I clenched my fists under the table. "That's not the point, Dad. Grandpa trusted me with this, and I have every right to it." Claire, who had been eavesdropping from the hallway, sauntered in with a smirk plastered across her face. "Oh, please, Anna! Let's be real. Grandpa probably just felt sorry for you." I shot her a glare. "He didn't pity me, Claire. He loved me, and he made it clear we were supposed to share." Her eyes darted to the papers, and I saw the color drain from her face for a brief second before she quickly regained her composure. "This doesn't mean anything," she scoffed, reaching for the documents. "Dad's right. You don't know how to handle money. Grandpa was just being nice." I snatched the papers away before she could touch them. "Nice or not, it's legal." What I hadn't anticipated was just how far Claire would go to maintain her illusion of control. The next day, I found her rifling through my room, her hands digging through my desk drawer where I had left the originals. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted, slamming the door behind me. Claire whirled around, holding Grandpa's letter in her hands, her face twisted in anger. "You're such a child, Anna," she hissed. "You think this little piece of paper changes anything? Dad's already on my side, and no one's going to believe you." I lunged forward, grabbing the letter from her grasp, but she fought back, her nails digging into my wrist. In the struggle, she managed to tear part of the letter, but I yanked it away before she could do more damage. "You're unbelievable," I gasped, my chest heaving with anger. She sneered. "You're not getting a dime, Anna." Grandpa probably didn't mean it anyway. I took a deep breath, fighting to keep my composure. You're scared, I said, staring her down. You know you're wrong, and you're afraid of the truth. Claire's jaw clenched, but before she could respond, I held up my phone. By the way, I took photos of everything. Good luck trying to destroy it now. Her eyes widened in alarm, and for the first time, she looked genuinely worried. Without another word, she stormed out of my room, slamming the door behind her. I knew then that I couldn't handle this alone anymore. I needed backup. That evening, I called my lawyer friend Jessica and explained the situation. She listened carefully and then said, "Anna, you have every legal right to that money. Don't let Claire intimidate you." The next family meeting was tense. I arrived with Jessica by my side, and as we all sat in the living room, I placed the documents on the coffee table once again. "Claire's been lying," I announced, my voice steady and confident. "Grandpa wanted us to share everything equally, and I have the legal proof." Dad's face darkened, and Claire let out a forced laugh. "This is ridiculous, Anna." Jessica leaned forward. "It's not ridiculous. It's legally binding, and if you continue to withhold what's rightfully Anna's, we'll be forced to take legal action." The room fell silent. Dad looked between us, his face pale, while Claire's eyes burned with rage. "This isn't over," she hissed, but I could see the fear behind her bravado. I smiled. "No, it's not, but it's getting there." Claire sat across from me at the dining room table, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently against the wood. Her confidence was faltering now, but she still held on to that infuriating smirk like it was her shield. Dad stood behind her, arms crossed, his face an unreadable mask. He always defaulted to supporting Claire, but I could see doubt creeping into his eyes. And then there was me, calm, collected on the outside, but inside my heart pounded like a drum. Jessica, my lawyer, and perhaps my last hope, sat beside me, flipping through a thick folder filled with evidence. "So let's go over this one more time," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Anna has presented a legally binding copy of your grandfather's will, which clearly states that his savings are to be split evenly between both sisters." She paused, letting the weight of the words sink in before continuing. "Claire, you have yet to provide any legitimate proof that contradicts this." Claire let out a fake laugh, shaking her head. "Oh, come on," she said, rolling her eyes. "Grandpa told me personally that he wanted me to handle everything. He trusted me more. Anna's just being difficult." I leaned forward, looking her directly in the eyes. "If Grandpa wanted you to handle everything, Claire, then why did he give me this?" I pulled out the original letter he had given me, now protected in a plastic sleeve. "This proves he wanted things to be fair. And no matter what lies you've been spinning, the truth is right here." Her smirk faltered, just for a second, before she leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "So what? Maybe Grandpa was just being sentimental. That doesn't mean he actually meant it," Jessica interjected smoothly. "Sentimental or not, it is legally binding. And, Claire, your actions over the past week trying to destroy this letter, spreading false information to your father, and attempting to access funds without proper authorization, those could be seen as fraud. You wouldn't want this to escalate further, would you?" Dad shifted uncomfortably, his brow furrowing. "Claire, you didn't actually try to—" Claire's eyes flashed with panic, and she quickly cut him off. "Dad, don't listen to them. Anna's blowing this way out of proportion. Grandpa trusted me, and you know it." I took a deep breath, steadying myself before delivering the final blow. "I've already contacted Grandpa's attorney," I said, watching as Claire's face turned pale. "They confirmed the authenticity of the will and are ready to proceed legally if necessary. You can keep fighting this, Claire, but you'll only end up embarrassing yourself." Her eyes darted between me, Jessica, and Dad, weighing her options. I could almost see the wheels turning in her head. If she pushed further, it would only lead to legal trouble and public humiliation. The Claire I knew would never let that happen. For a moment, she opened her mouth as if to argue again, but then she slammed her hands on the table, standing up abruptly. "Fine!" she spat, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "You want your stupid half? Take it, but don't think for a second this means you deserve it." Jessica cleared her throat, maintaining her professional composure. "That's a wise decision, Claire. I'll arrange for the transfer of funds accordingly." Dad sighed, rubbing his temples as if the weight of the situation had finally hit him. "I just don't understand why Grandpa wouldn't tell me about this," he muttered. "I thought Claire was the best choice." I softened, even though the sting of his favoritism still hurt. "Dad, Grandpa believed in both of us. He wanted things to be fair, not just for Claire, but for me too. I think he trusted that I'd fight for what's right." Claire, now standing by the door, shot me one last venomous glare. "Enjoy your pity money, Anna," she sneered. "I hope you waste it like you do everything else." And with that, she stormed out of the room, leaving an awkward silence in her wake. Dad sighed again and slowly sat down. "Maybe I've been too blind to see things clearly," he said finally, his voice quieter. "I'm sorry, Anna. I should have listened to you from the start." Tears stung at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "Thanks, Dad. That means a lot." Jessica stood, gathering her papers. "I'll make sure everything is handled legally from here on out, Anna. If Claire tries anything else, let me know." As I walked Jessica to the door, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: relief. Claire had spent years making me feel like I was nothing, but this time I had stood my ground and won. Grandpa's faith in me wasn't misplaced. I had honored his wishes and, more importantly, reclaimed a piece of myself that Claire had tried to take away for years. I turned back to the living room where Dad sat, looking lost in thought. Maybe our relationship could be mended, or maybe not. Either way, I had finally proven that I wasn't just the forgotten sister anymore. I was someone who could stand up for herself, for what was right. And that, more than anything, was the real inheritance Grandpa left me. In the days following Claire's dramatic exit, the house felt quieter, almost eerily so. Dad, once so adamant that Claire was the responsible one, seemed deflated, as if the truth of it all had finally settled in. I'd catch him sitting in Grandpa's old chair, staring at nothing in particular, lost in thought. He never outright admitted that he'd been wrong, but in the little ways like asking about my day or offering to help with small things around the house, I could tell he was trying. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Claire, on the other hand, kept her distance. She didn't show up for our usual Sunday family dinners, and I was perfectly fine with that. When she did finally reach out, it was through a cold, impersonal text message. "I hope you're happy now." I stared at the screen for a long time before finally replying, "I am." She left it on read. With the financial matters finally settled, Jessica helped me arrange the official transfer of my share of Grandpa's savings. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to make a difference. I used part of it to pay off my student loans and finally moved out of Dad's house into a cozy little apartment in the city. It wasn't much, just a small space with creaky floors and a tiny balcony, but it was mine, and that made all the difference. One afternoon, as I was unpacking boxes in my new place, I came across Grandpa's letter again. Holding it in my hands, I felt a wave of emotions wash over me. He had always believed in me, and in the end, he was right. I could stand up for myself. I could fight for what was fair. And no matter how much Claire had tried to push me aside, I had proven that I wasn't going to be overlooked anymore. I framed the letter and placed it on the small bookshelf in my living room, right next to a photo of Grandpa and me from when I was little. It was a reminder not just of the battle I had won, but of the strength I had found within myself. As weeks passed, I found myself healing in ways I hadn't expected. With Claire out of my everyday life, I realized just how much space she had occupied in my thoughts. Without her constant need to overshadow me, I finally had room to breathe, to think about my future. I signed up for a few business courses at the local community college, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the confidence to pursue. Grandpa's savings weren't just money, they were an opportunity, and I was determined to make the most of them. Dad came by one evening, a little awkward but clearly trying. He handed me a small box and cleared his throat. "Your grandpa wanted you to have this," he said, avoiding my eyes. I opened it to find an old pocket watch, Grandpa's favorite. I blinked back tears and managed a small smile. "Thanks, Dad," I said softly. It wasn't an apology, but it was a step in the right direction. Claire might never change. She might always see me as the lesser sister, the one who didn't deserve to share in anything. But that didn't matter anymore. I didn't need her validation or Dad's approval to feel whole. I had found something far more valuable, my self-worth. And as I stood on my little balcony that night, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, I knew that Grandpa would be proud of me. A year later, life looked completely different. My little apartment had become a home, filled with books, plants, and the quiet sense of peace I never thought I'd have. I had finished my business courses and landed a job at a financial firm, nothing too fancy, but something I was proud of. Grandpa's savings had given me the push I needed to start fresh, and I was determined not to waste it. Claire and I hadn't spoken in months, and honestly, I didn't miss the drama. Dad visited occasionally, and while things between us would never be perfect, we were better. He even smiled when he saw Grandpa's framed letter on my shelf. One evening, as I sat with a cup of tea, staring out at the city skyline, I felt something I hadn't in years: contentment. Grandpa's faith in me had never wavered, and now, finally, neither did mine. I whispered a quiet, "Thank you, Grandpa," and for the first time, I truly believed I deserved everything I had fought for.